All right. Hi and good afternoon, everyone who's tuning in. My name is Diana, and I'm a health coach and psychologist here at Naluri. Nice to meet you. Okay. And thank you so much for being here today. And without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about our topic for today, which is battling burnout. Yeah. So, kindly entertain me for a little exercise here. So, let's imagine yourself as a kettle. Have you ever felt like you're a dry and empty kettle sitting on a hot stove, with the fire constantly burning from underneath, but you have literally no more water or air to give? So, technically, this kettle scenario or analogy is what burnout feels like. So essentially, one keeps pushing further and harder and harder, and no matter how hard the person pushes, somehow the what they get is much less in return. So eventually, we reach to a point that we may feel like we have no more or nothing more to give. Actually, lah. So unfortunately, burnout is a common feeling and experience in our society. And so, what does burnout mean, right? So, technically, burnout is a state of emotional and physical and mental exhaustion, technically feeling listless, unable to cope, that is usually brought upon prolonged or repeated stress. So, it happens when you feel really overwhelmed or emotionally drained, or finding it really hard to kind of meet constant demands, commonly from work, but not just restricted to work scenarios. I'll explain that a little bit more. So, in this scenario, right, when the stress actually continues, we may actually begin to kind of lose interest and motivation that made us take on the role in the first place. So, burnout can affect us in many ways, that it can take away our productivity, our energy, leaving us feeling really helpless, hopeless, sometimes even cynical and resentful. So, negative effects of burnout actually can affect almost all areas of our lives, including our home, our work, and our social lives. And it can cause long-term changes to our body that can actually make us more vulnerable to illnesses. So now the big question is, am I on the way to burnout? Okay. So I have a few questions lined up in the next slide that you can take your time to kind of reflect on your own time, whether seeing whether burnout may be affecting your life. Okay. So the first question is every day feeling like a really bad day? And finding good days, being able to count for more good days seems really hard or less than usual. Okay. And the second one is, are you feeling more exhausted or feeling exhausted almost all the time? So this is really important to kind of notice. And does caring about work or home life seem like a total waste of energy? So if you're noticing that you're feeling this, keep that in mind, like reflect. Okay. And the fourth one is, are you spending a lot of your time on tasks that you feel are mind-numbingly dull or exceedingly overwhelming? Okay. And the last one is, do you feel like you have nothing that you do makes a difference or is being appreciated? So whether it matters or not. Lah. Okay. So if you answer yes to kind of most of these questions, then it's best to kind of notice and take seriously that you may be at risk for burnout. Okay. So these are some common signs or common warning signs of burnout, which includes exhaustion, as mentioned previously, feelings of reduced creativity, headaches and stomach aches, poor performance, and cynicism at work. So remember, like the kettle example, right? When we try to give. So we notice that our creativity, especially when we're in the profession of providing creative outlets and results, we're noticing that the creativity has reduced and is becoming more and more difficult. Okay, so actually, burnout can affect us in three ways. It definitely can affect us, like I mentioned, physically, emotionally, and behaviorally. So I'll explain a little bit more in terms of like physically. We will notice that we're feeling tired and drained most of the time, and our immunity may be lowered, hence experiencing more frequent headaches and muscle pains, sometimes joint pains as well, and affecting our appetite and sleeping habits. So maybe we're sleeping less, or most of the time it's sleeping less, and maybe reduction in appetite. Okay, and for emotionally, we would notice that we will feel a sense of failure, okay, and self-doubt, questioning ourselves a lot, like, am I doing this right? Suddenly sending that email that I would normally send so quickly, so easily, becomes like a huge burden or a huge emotional task, and feeling helpless, trapped, defeated, or even detached, feeling really alone, finding yourself um, not connecting to anyone, and having a loss of motivation, and increasingly cynical, and having a more negative outlook of your work or your colleagues or even like your employers, something that you used to enjoy, it in your passion of work suddenly now becomes so like dreadful, you're dreading it, and experiencing a decreased satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. Okay. And lastly, burnout can affect our actions by it can manifest in ways that we withdraw from our responsibilities, and socially isolate ourselves from families, from friends, from our colleagues. Procrastination suddenly gets even higher than usual, concerningly high. And then maybe we're using unhealthy food or drugs or alcohol to cope, and taking out frustration on others. So maybe our loved one or our family members might say a comment like, hey, I noticed you're more irritable, or I noticed that you're more reactive, or somehow when I say something you get triggered so easily. So it can be a symptom, a behavioral symptom of burnout. And in terms of work, we will notice that we're taking more leaves or skipping work a lot, and coming in late, or maybe even leaving earlier. Okay, now I think it's really important to address something, that it's common that we have days when we feel helpless, overloaded, and unappreciated. But when it requires the strength and determination of Hercules, or like some super strong muscular guy, right, to drag ourselves from bed, that we may be actually at risk for burnout. So the thing about burnout is that it's actually a gradual process, and it doesn't happen overnight. So it's pretty subtle, but can get worse as time goes on without management and intervention. Okay, so it's prevention here is really the key to ensure that you're catching and identifying early symptoms and red flags of issues that needs to be addressed, and actively to reduce your stress through healthy stress management skills. Okay, so speaking of stress, right, how do I know what's the difference between feeling stressed and burnt out? Okay, so by definition, as I explained earlier, burnt out is an extended period of stress. Okay, which means that it feels like that cannot be relieved. Okay, stress, however, is actually a state of mental tension or pressure resulting from demanding circumstances. So stress involves feeling too much pressure and demands. Okay, but with stress, right, if we can imagine that we can have everything under control, we would feel a little bit more relieved or better. But and if stress is actually short-lived and tied to a specific goal, is highly or most likely not that harmful. But the thing is, if the stress feels never ending and comes with feelings of emptiness, apathy, hopelessness, then it may be indicative of burnt out. So burnt out essentially is focused more on feeling like it's not enough. So again, like feeling empty, mentally exhausted, having lack of motivation, and reduction in caring. And we may find it difficult to see any hope or positive change in our situations. So stress feels more like drowning, whereas burnt out gives a sense of like being all dried up, like the kettle from earlier, you know. I hope that clarifies things. Okay, now I'm going to share a story of this lady called Delia. She's a 50-year-old senior manager in healthcare. So she shared that she has been off work on sick leave for 3 days. She shared that she's been dreading returning and believed that she is suffering from workplace stress. So she has a really demanding job and worked on a shift roster. So I think maybe some of us actually can relate to this quite highly. Okay. And she shared that she was in a constant state of exhaustion and she hates everything about her job. And it's uh, quite an extreme thought towards her job. So she had physical symptoms of an upset stomach and she grinds her teeth at night to the point that she's developing sore jaws, or like her jaw feels sore. Okay. And at home and at work, she was more short tempered and she felt more overwhelmed about everything. So she may lash out on her children, lash out to her family members, maybe lash out to her team members and also her colleagues. Okay, so she also shared that there had been an increase in responsibilities at work, but lacking in support. In fact, saying there's no support. So she felt that she had no friends at work, friends, and that she had nobody that she has a close relationship with. So if you can see from this sharing, right, Delia was experiencing workplace burnt out. And the symptoms of burnt out are actually quite similar to symptoms of depression. And that's because burnt out is actually a predictor of depression. Hence, if it's left untreated and unchecked, burnt out can actually evolve into depression, but not necessarily, but can. Okay. So, how is burnt out different from depression then? Okay, let me explain that. So, depression is actually a mood disorder that can be described as feelings of sadness, loss of interest in daily life, and feelings of hopelessness. Sometimes it can manifest in anger as well. And the key point here is that it interferes with a person's everyday activities and responsibilities. So, depression really makes it difficult for you to wake up every day, for you to go to work, for you to do all your responsibilities on that is done normally on a daily basis. So, but the thing about burnt out, the main difference between burnt out and depression is that most of the time, burnt out is associated with work or one specific area of life, which is like parenting or caregiving or romantic relationships. Whereas depression is having negative thoughts and feelings about all areas of life. So burnt out is one area, depression is all areas. And actually, depression requires further treatment from mental health professionals. And regarding burnt out is often, but not always presented with depressive symptoms. But oftentimes that people who do experience burnt out, quality rest and rejuvenation and sometimes change in how things are done with their relationship with work and their ethics with work style with work can actually provide some relief feelings of burnt out. So that's essentially the difference between depression and burnt out. Okay, so now let's ask ourselves, am I at risk for burnt out? Okay, so like I mentioned, commonly burnt out is caused by problems at work, but it can also appear in other areas of life, such as parenting, caretaking, and romantic relationships. For example, caretaking, if you are someone who has to take care of someone who has chronic illness, you're constantly giving because you are taking care of that person. So you may be at high risk of burnt out. I will explain a little bit more. So essentially, it comes from actually feelings of feeling overworked and undervalued, but can also stem actually from our lifestyle choices and personality traits too. So, in addition, what we do in our downtime and how we view the world, it can actually also play a big role in causing overwhelming stress and burnt out as well. So, I'll elaborate a little bit more from each factor. So, for work related issues, right, you would feel like you have little to no control over work. And if you notice that you lack recognition or reward for good work, having really unclear or overly demanding job expectations, or doing monotonous and unchallenging work, working in a chaotic or high pressure environment and constantly. So, this being in this constant state definitely is highly stressful and can increase risk of burnt out. So that's for work related issues. But besides our jobs actually and our working environment or the working lifestyle, our lifestyle choices can also contribute our risk to burnt out. So this is what I meant by, like, for example, if you're working too much, having very little to no time to socialize or relax, lacking close supportive relationships, taking too many responsibilities without enough help, and not getting enough sleep. Sleep is really, really important and can definitely affect the way we manage stress. So our lifestyle can also increase the risk of, developing burnt out. Okay. And lastly, personality traits, can also play a factor too. Like, for example, having more perfectionist tendencies, like, you feel like nothing you do is ever good enough. So you're constantly pushing yourself. I need to try harder and harder and harder, and having a pessimistic view of yourself and the world, essentially saying, oh, nothing I do is good enough or is going to be ever upstanding to whatever people think of me and what I need to deliver, and feeling the need to be in control all the time. So, especially in all areas, which makes it then very difficult or might be slightly tricky for you to kind of delegate tasks. Okay, so these are all the possible risks or the factors that can put you at risk for burnt out. So I think I may be burnt out, right? What can I do? Okay, so let's remember the 3 R's. Okay, number 1 is recognize. So start by learning to recognize the warning signs of burnt out. And since you're here at this burnt out webinar, well done. You're already doing step 1. Okay, so number 2 is actually to reverse any damage by seeking support and asking for help. Okay, learning ways to cope and cope with stress using effective coping strategy skills, as well as learning to say no, by avoiding taking on new commitments, responsibilities that aren't absolutely necessary, if you notice, actually. And learn to delegate tasks. If you have the opportunity to pass some responsibility or projects off to someone else, really consider doing so. Okay. And the last R I would like to share with you is called resilience. Building resilience is by taking care of your physical and mental health. By doing so, it's by scheduling breaks in between big tasks or projects so that you're not constantly in a stressful state, leaving work at work. And I know, as being constantly connected towards our work doesn't give us that time to not answer messages or emails or take calls. So it's really, really important to set boundaries and to prevent ourselves at risk for burning out, and actually increases productivity as well. And lastly is to ensure that, we're exercising well, we're sleeping well, we're having a healthy diet, essentially because it's really good. It's how would I say, it's really important. It's a holistic approach of health and well-being. Okay, meaning to combine both physical and mental health and strategies is essential when facing burnt out. Okay, regular exercise, getting good quality of sleep, eating healthy diet definitely has been proven to support good mental health. and reduce stress and actually increase problem solving and concentration. So actually taking care of your physical health sets a good foundation, a strong foundation for overall well-being, including your mental health as well. So, right. And if you think you need more help, that's okay too. You can always reach out to any mental health professionals, counselors, psychologists to kind of help you better, to help you manage your burnt out symptoms even more clearly.